We're in budget season. Actually, we've been in budget season since August the 30th. But now is when it comes out into the public because the finance bill, for all intents and purposes, the bells and whistles are being put on all of it now. And it will come back to Parliament. It will come for public participation. And then soon after that, depending on what is changed or not, it will become an act. And that then is the bloodline that will be given to the country to spend its money. More or less, that's the process. And so we're going to be looking into the Finance Bill 2026, take a snapshot from all of that and see what possibly could be pain points, could be glory points for Kenya when we're going to look into how the economy will grow, shift or change in the next financial year. Dr. Stephen Gashie is an economist. He joins us in the hot seat this morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you doing?
Good.
Karibu sana.
Good to see you again.
Good to see you too.
It's been a bit.
It has. And now we're into money season. So let's see what this conversation has in store.
Good.
Joined in the other hot seat by James Kimani, who is Associate Director, Tax and Regulatory Services at the KPMG East Africa. Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to the hot seat of the Situation Room.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Thank you for being here this morning. We're looking at some heavy stuff this morning, but necessary for us to do because you're going to realize then essentially how Kenya will appropriate, spend, use, budget its money over the next 12 months. And that's, of course, coming in from the 1st of July. But before we get into that, let's welcome you today with today's proverb. We go around the African country, James, just in case the African continent, just in case you don't know, to a different African country every week. This week, we're in the Kingdom of Eswatini. We'll share a proverb, and we'd love to get your interpretation of that today. And this is what it says. A person who says it cannot be done should not interrupt the man doing it. A person says a thing cannot be done should not interrupt the man doing it. What's that with you, James?
Well, quite a complex one, but still simple. What I think is that if you think there's somebody else who is better placed, to be able to execute a certain task, I think you are better placed to allow them to proceed. At the end of the day, perhaps you start to benefit as well. Yeah, that would be my simple interpretation of that.
I'll keep it simple.
Yeah.
If you can't tolerate the heat of the kitchen, get out of it.
Okay. Can't take the heat, get out of the kitchen. Okay. Well, it would appear as though there's one kitchen that nobody can get out of really right now, and that's in terms of what's going to be happening with the finance bill, which for now, for all intents and purposes, is still a bill. It's going to be discussed, one would hope, heavily, and it's going to be scrutinized. Then it will be legislated on, and depending on what comes out of that, it will become an act. And that then forms the basis of what will happen then with appropriations after that, and how Kenya will spend its money and where it will borrow from in order to then be able to meet what KRA then has a responsibility of collecting, what you're going to borrow from the domestic market, what you're going to borrow from external markets, and essentially how you will run the country. So all of these things are put into the bill, and there's a figure. The big number that we're looking at is 4.7 trillion shillings, the highest yet. And we are then being given insights as to where this money is going to come from. Some of it, like I said, will come from tax. Some of it will come from borrowing, whether that's domestic or external. But hopefully those numbers will be put together. And then we've been told where this money will go. Now, the interest for a lot of people in the finance bill is where this money not will go, but where it will come from. Right? And those are the things that go into this finance bill. So what people want to understand, what we'd like to get to be able to understand a little bit this morning is what are those things where the money will come from that will then have an effect on what Kenyans will have to do in the next few months. I'll start off with you, James. What are some of the things that we're looking into in the finance bill that maybe causes for concern or may make sense and we say, okay, fine, go ahead with it?
Yeah, and thank you so much. It's a very timely conversation for us to have. You'd remember that before the Constitution 2010, the minister would then table the bill at the point of reading the budget. But then what happens thereafter is that the bill now is tabled before Parliament by 30th of April. However, in the last few years, we have seen there have been some delay because if you look at 30th of April, it's perhaps about 2 weeks ago.
Yes.
And we only received this bill over the weekend. That's from Friday. And this particular bill then, what it then targeted to achieve 120 billion this financial year. We have seen, it's quite a small bill. We have seen other bills that have targeted over 311 billion. If you look at the finance bill for 2021, for example, 2022, they were targeting over 200 plus in terms of the money to be corrected. But the current one is targeting 120 billion, which then will fall into what the Revenue Authority, the Kenya Revenue Authority, is expected to collect. They have been given a target of 2.9, up from 2.7 that they are expected to achieve this financial year. Quite an uphill task. And that tells you if this year they're expected to do 2.7 and the target is now 2.9, that's an upward of 200 billion. And if then the finance bill is only collecting 120, we still have a deficit of about 80 in terms of assuming everything goes as it was planned. In this finance bill then, you realize that there are several elements that the government is then looking at collecting some taxes. We have had many amnesties that the government have put in place. In the last, I would say, 4 years, we have had almost tax amnesty every year. And last year, the amnesty collected an additional 35 billion. And what amnesty essentially means is that you're being told, come on board, tell us the taxes that you have not paid, and we'll waive the penalties and interest.
But pay the tax.
Yeah, pay the principal tax, then we'll waive the penalties and interest. And what that does is that it sort of encourage people to come, up front and be able to pay the taxes that are due. And that is one of the key elements that the Finance Bill 2026 is trying to bring on board, to say we are giving you an extension of the amnesty to December 2026 for you to come on board, pay any additional tax that you did not pay, and will be able to waive penalties and interest. And that's actually one of the positive things perhaps I have seen in this finance bill. Just one of those taxpayers that can be happy about, because I'll pay the principal tax, I'll get waiver of penalties and interest. It's a good thing.
At the same time, though, on this very same thing, the KRA is still being allowed. The proposal in this is that KRA is being allowed to issue agency notices even if a taxpayer has appealed a tax bill. I can come and I can appeal something, but KRA can still place an agency notice on me as a business or me as an individual, freeze my accounts essentially, even if I have come to you and I have said there's 1, 2, 3 problem. That's one thing that they've put that seems to be a countermeasure to what you've just mentioned.
And you are right. And that is one of the proposals I think will put conversation with the parliament to tell them it does not make sense. If, for example, you have said that I did not pay tax on 1, 2, 3, which I disagree with, and perhaps is a principle of the interpretation of law, then I should then be allowed to appeal. And you cannot come and freeze my accounts because then you are essentially saying I'm guilty and I have not, the courts have not pronounced itself. So perhaps it's one of the proposals that may not at the end go through. We have seen, for example, if you remember in 2022, they had introduced an aspect that if you are appealing, you have to pay 30%. And that happens in our neighboring countries, Uganda, Tanzania, such that if you have any taxes or ability that the Revenue Authority have raised, you need to pay 30% before then you appeal. And we went against it, and at the end, actually, court said it's unconstitutional because essentially you are saying this person is guilty. So similarly to this issue of the agency notices, I'm sure that many of the taxpayers will come out and they'll obviously give their views, and members of parliament are definitely likely to listen on this. It's one of those that we do not understand why the National Treasury will go that route, because you are then telling the taxpayers you are actually guilty before you prosecute your matter. Yeah, but maybe also to say in this, apart from the amnesty that I have seen, most of the other things are really counterproductive to what you have just mentioned. The government is so keen about ESG, for example, conserving our environment. And we have seen deliberate effort by the government to actually conserve environment. But when it comes to the finance bill, such like the Finance 2026, we are seeing things like electric bicycles, which the government should be actually promoting. Now saying we will now be actually levying tax at 16%, exempting them from taxes. Initially, there was zero rated, and what zero rating means is that the person who is producing this particular product can actually be able to claim the input, making that product cheap to the end consumer. When you then make this product exempt, when you are essentially then saying is that the producer of this product cannot be able to claim the input and therefore have to pass that cost to the end consumer, essentially making those products more expensive. So then it is counterproductive to the argument that the government have had that we are trying to encourage electric bicycles, electric buses, although it's something we have seen in the last 4 years. Every finance bill have had this. electric bicycles, electric buses, and all these being moved from zero-rated to exempt. But finally, after the discussion through the Committee of Finance and National Planning, these things are actually taken back to the zero-rating. We don't know whether it's a tactic of the government to try and ensure that we actually listened to you, and therefore we have amended what you said. Perhaps is one of the reasons. Things like, I think one of the things that have been there every year is the transportation of sugarcane. I don't know what is the appetite about transportation of sugarcane that is not there on transportation of tea and coffee. Every year it is being moved from zero-rated to exempt, then back to zero-rating every financial year. And therefore, there are many different aspects that are not good for the economy. And one critical one, if you allow me, is the element of money transfer. We want to move to digital economy, and therefore we do not want people to continue carrying cash. You are aware about the Supreme Court ruling that was done just the other day on back, because it's in the public domain, Backers of Kenya against the Revenue Authority. And the issue was the element of interchange fees. When you go and swipe your card, there's some fees that you are charged, which then goes to the Visa and MasterCard of this world. And as a result of the government losing that case, it's now coming back and introduce amendment in the law to make sure that they are able to collect that taxes that the Supreme Court told them that they cannot collect. And what is likely to happen is that because the banks may not absorb that cost, it essentially means that they might then end up passing that cost to the end consumer. So then we are trying to tell people that you don't have to transact digitally. You can perhaps use cash. And what that means is that from a security perspective, the cost of printing more money becomes more expensive. And for me, that is one of the counterproductive arguments that I have seen, that perhaps we need to have a discussion with the National Treasury and Parliament to understand what is the thinking behind that.
Let me just, you're talking about some counterproductive proposals. They backtrack. You remember that a month ago, the President, the CS Treasury, John Buddy, are on record having said that persons earning 50,000 shillings and below, who are actually forming a larger bulk, more than 1 million,
correct,
will enjoy some income tax cuts. That has actually been silent in this particular finance bill. But in the same, John Buddy, the CS, goes ahead and says that they are introducing an amendment to the tax law where they'll be increasing the threshold of those exempted from tax, from those earning 24,000, it will now be moved to 30,000. How practical is it if those earning 50,000, is it a political promise? And how practical is it?
And you are right. I think we have seen many political statements that don't fight themselves into law. And listening to the CS yesterday, what he said is that they are trying to do some computation to realize that they are likely to be losing 35 billion if they were to do exactly what you have said. And therefore, it is becoming increasingly difficult for the government to actually source or get additional resources because we are getting to a position where we have now gotten we cannot be able to collect additional taxes from the taxpayers. And we are not able also to borrow additional loans because we have already gotten to the threshold. And therefore the question becomes, if we then say that some additional people will not pay tax and therefore we lose the 35 billion, the government then must come with measures of where do we get this additional money. So it's obviously a catch-22, I would think. But I feel that given that one of the things that the government need to do is to increase the available cash for the people to spend. And one of the things to do that is by ensuring that these people in the lower cadre, the people earning 50,000 perhaps or 30,000, are not subjected to tax. And if that was to happen, then it means you will increase money in circulation or the spending element for those people, and that would then make sort of the economy grow. So for me, I think as a political statement, we would wait to see. I know most of the people actually that is what people are waiting for, given because the CS mentioned this, the President mentioned this, but we didn't find it. We didn't find this in the bill. But I think what the minister was explaining is that they would then have lost 35 billion, and what they are first of all thinking is that where do they get this 35 billion? Because already with the finance bill, we are still short by 80 billion because the additional target for KRA is 2.9. Out of the 2.7, they are likely to achieve this year. So even there's already a deficit of about 80 billion. So if we cut down then an additional 35 billion, that takes the deficit higher. So I think those are some of the dynamics that are a bit tricky at this moment. But I think there are many elements that the government can do to be able to cushion taxpayers against those taxes.
Dr. Kashishe, under the finance bill, there are quite a number of things that are coming in terms of proposals. Of course, one of them is the interest on digital payments, whereby you're saying that this is the way to go. But then we're also looking at a number of other things. For example, if a leasing company pays 10 million shillings in interest, but earns 20 million shillings profit, only part of that interest can be deducted under the current rule. Under the new proposal, they can deduct the full 10 million. Companies can only deduct interest costs up to 30% of their profits. The proposal under the finance bill says it seeks to change rules on interest for lending and leasing businesses. The proposal says these businesses will not be limited by the 30% rule on interest. This is one of the changes that comes on. The bill seeks to tighten reporting rules for virtual asset service providers. There is a new proposal under the finance bill that seeks to introduce a 25% excise duty on new mobile phones. The proposal says smartphones and feature phones will attract a 25% tax on the point of first activation on a Kenyan mobile network. What do you think about that? Whereby, obviously, we're in the digital age, a lot more is being done now using digital assets like this. But to purchase one, you need to pay a little bit more money. Is that encouraging local manufacturing, like we were told yesterday is actually happening in Kenya? Or is it just saying that imports will be more expensive?
Oh, very well. I think before I go for that, I think I want to demystify a myth that has existed every year, that we must always have a financial bill.
Okay.
It is not always true. We should not. Actually, if I was the CS Treasury, I would not have.
Why?
Because what largely this bill has is more of reforms and compliance issues. I would just done amendments, just like what they did in 2025 for the financial bill that fell flat, financial bill 2024. So it's not always that you must have a finance bill. Yeah, I think James will concur with me. Number two, when I saw the proposal from CS Buddy last year about giving relief to those earning 50,000 and below, I see it is not possible because there was no trade-off. There was no trade-off.
What does that mean?
It means that if you lose 50 billion, you must show me where you are going to get it because you need the money. So it is not possible, and it won't even happen this year because the government looking for revenue that is not coming through. Back to, then I'll go to another thing. Back to what you're saying, the most significant also proposal is about 6% assumption on capital gain or profit, where the government is assuming that 6%, they want to take off 6% from the company's profitability, assuming that is a distributable profit, like a dividend, meaning that even before you go, when you do your returns, I think that is true, James, you knock off 6%. The company, corporates pay 6% to the government.
Okay, I'm sorry. So I have a donut company. I'm making good money in 2025. On profit, I've made, I don't know how many donuts we're eating, but okay, let's say I made 100 million shillings from donuts profit. I am supposed to give 6% of that profit to government.
It's assumed that is a distributable profit, is dividends.
Okay. To shareholders and such.
To shareholders. So you need to pay that to the government.
Okay.
So what it has, for me, I know James is looking from the taxation regime. My eyes always look from the economic perspective. What does it mean for economy? And especially so when you're looking for investors to come and invest in the country. It means now investing in the country becomes quite expensive. And if I had my money, why would I come to Kenya? Why should I not go to Tanzania? Why should I go to Rwanda? So I think I keep saying that Treasury, CS, should always have what we call theory of change every time they are doing the finance bill. For example, when you talk about 25% excise duty on mobile phone. Mobile phone nowadays is not just for saying hello and goodbye.
No, it's not.
It's an office. Meaning now that it becomes expensive, it becomes unaffordable, and you're talking about digital economy. You're talking about creative. You're talking about youth who will otherwise want to buy a good phone so that they're able to go to the digital economy and make some money. What does that mean for that young man in Mhaya in Western Kenya? And you're telling him for him to buy a good phone, he need to have about almost an extra 10,000. And maybe that is how much he had. Also, what you talk about the transfer, money transfer, we are looking at financial deepening and inclusivity, and for transaction to be affordable. The economy is built on production and consumption. Meaning, if consumption is affordable, the government will be able to correct more of VAT, what we call the consumption taxes. But when you make, in one hand, you make one phase of it expensive, then means the economy does not grow. For me, where I was talking about the theory of change, if you look at also the proposal about the digital space, whereby there's exemption of VAT on some of even the networking, and the government is saying it wants to make about 100,000 of fiber cable across the country. The government itself becomes very expensive for it to lay. It becomes very expensive for them to lay the cable so that it can achieve what it has promised on the manifesto. Then there's another proposal, 5% on Mituba.
Yes.
Meaning, before you get your container from Mombasa, it's like an advance tax, what Matatus pay. So meaning, whether you make profit or not, you must pay 5%. On Mutuba, and then it means now those more informal traders who trade largely on such becomes the same will going to be passed over to the consumer. The same with the rental income.
So all of this essentially goes to the end user. That's what we're talking about. So when we see it as, it could be a punitive tax or it could be a restorative tax, whatever the case may be, but that there is an increase in how much somebody is going to spend. And more often than not, that goes to the end user. Let's look at the Mitumba for a minute. That one would say, actually, you know what? This is a good idea. For example, if you're going to deal with protectionist policies for your farmers, for your business people who might get into the place where they manufacture in country, what you want to do is that you want to increase taxes and levies on import. Because what that does is that then you're able to reduce the inputs for the practitioners in country, right? So that you encourage the market to grow. Now, do you see the back end happening? When you say, let's increase 5% on Mitumba, on the other side, are we seeing local textile industry then actually getting the investment and growing so that you ask, what is Kenya doing and why would it then be attractive to investors? Do you see what I'm saying? That must there be an answer on the other side? If you say 5% on Mitumba, then okay, if it's going to be more expensive to import clothing that have been cheap for people to purchase, are we then going to see that in the textile industry it has become cheaper for people to manufacture and then also purchase clothing in Kenya? Must there be a give and take when we're looking at these numbers?
That's what I talked about, theory of change. Because it would make sense if Western Kenya, all of it, is now growing cotton.
Okay.
So where, and that's what I call hypothetical brightness. Where is cotton in Western Kenya so that the 5% that we are living on Mutuba may discourage import so that farmers in Western Kenya are getting a boom because they have grown cotton, they have created journalists, so they have the cotton industries. There is productivity. And now our textile industry is thriving. In absence of that, then there's no value.
Okay.
And maybe just a rider, it's being termed as a presumed profit of 5%. And the CS says this was a proposal from industry players. From the financial world, presumed profit. How does maybe our viewer understand this presumed profit of 5%? And remember, the published finance bill by Parliament, that was published by Parliament, never had this. It's being reintroduced. It had been dropped. It's being reintroduced. And the CS says it was proposed by industry players?
Industry players does not necessarily mean Mutuba traders. It could mean those people in textile industry. So,
which is a disadvantage to Mutuba traders?
Yeah, maybe the textile industry. And also, our textile industry is hugely for export. EPZ and the world. So, I would like to understand which industry. For me, I would be happy if you're producing, because meaning we save a lot of money that we use, the forex exchange that we use to import. So we have our money here. Okay? So I would like to know which industry players are in that, and what is that they're doing so that the industry grows. And we get to know, so when the Mituba are levied 5%, how much does it go, what does it mean to the textile industry in the country? So the other question was, you had asked about the presumption of profit. So the assumption is that every time you go to business, there is a proportion of your profitability.
So the estimate.
The CS Treasury assumes that the minimum profit, maybe from Mutumba, is 5%. So is that what is proposing to take?
The profit that these guys are making anyway.
Meaning you are making more than 5%. So
it's not taking more than you're making.
No, they're saying the minimum you can make. That's an assumption. I don't know, grounded on what. So that is now what we are saying. Most likely is going to be passed over to the consumer. Already, if you look at the Kenyan consumer, the purchasing power is so constrained that that's why our economy is not growing. And I was looking through the finance bill 2026-2027 to see what are those incentives are there so that we can tinker the growth of our economy. And remember, probably this will be the last finance bill and budget for entirely KK government, because the next budget will be 2027, 2028.
Yes.
Meaning the government will only have 2 months
to implement.
If it's good to change, if it's good to continue, then it will have it for the next. So this entirely, we'll be looking at what they have in mind as we go to 2027. And very interesting. And there's also another myth that the bill did not increase taxes. All financial acts are in what we call perpetuity model. That the Financial Act 2023 is in force. So we still continue to pay taxes as per last year, 2025.
Okay.
So there's nothing new about Finance Bill 2026. And that's what I was saying. There was no value to do it. The minister would have just done amendments for 2025 Financial Bill Act. And they continue.
Yeah. And I think, for Jane, I think that's my question also, because if we want to look at this thing properly, by and large, the number crunchers, the people who are looking at these numbers, the estimates, that word that they love to use, the estimates and all of this, is not the CS. Is not the CS Treasury.
Yeah.
There is a whole battalion of people who sit, they watch, they look at these numbers all the time. They take the budgets that have come from the different departments of government and they say, okay, this is what you want to do in the next year. Let's see where we're going to get this money from, essentially. They crunch the numbers. They're economists. They are statisticians. They are logistics people. They know all of this thing. So if you're looking at a really progressive economy, because I guess that is what the goal is, in whose interest is it to increase taxes whereby you are looking towards a progressive economy when you want to have your focus on SMEs, for example, MSMEs, for example, the ones that we know foolproof are the ones who build an economy around the world? Why would you do anything that would be counterproductive? That's the word that we've used in this room already. Why would you, as this battalion of people who know it better than anybody else, deliver a budget, deliver a finance bill that would be counterproductive to a progressive economy if there was no external hand? There's my conspiracy.
Yeah, and you are right. And before I just respond to your question, on this question of Metuba, which we need to be careful on, is that the document, and you mentioned it, the document that came from Parliament do not have this tax on Metuba.
Yes.
But yesterday when the minister was giving his speech, he actually said they are going to introduce it. Remember, they can only introduce it if the public come with that proposal. Otherwise, the government have already given its proposals, and that proposal is not there. Therefore, unless the public come and say that we think that you can get additional taxes on this particular element, that is the only way they can introduce. And remember, that Committee for Finance and National Planning always table that report to say so and so say that we tax metubas. So who is going to say that? So that becomes very tricky, and particularly the fact that we are going to election next year is unlikely that this proposal will come through. But now coming to your question, I think the biggest issue is that we are moving our budget every year and trying to grow the budget every year. Last year we were at 4.2 trillion. This year now we are so ambitious we want to go to 4.2. But this 4.2 is what we intend to spend. And if then we rely on what Dr. Gashi have mentioned, the finance bit of the Finance Act that are already in place, that we continue to pay taxes, it means we can only collect to the tune of the 2.7, for example, what we are collecting this year. If then we need additional taxes, we have two elements only. Either we increase the tax rates or increase the taxes, or we then enhance compliance. We assume that there are people who are not paying taxes, and therefore we need to enhance that. Perhaps we have gotten to saturation level and we cannot be able to increase additional taxes. So what the government is saying, for example, in this, the question you talked about mobile phones, they were being charged excess duty at 10%. And now the minister is saying we need to correct 25%. Listening to him yesterday, he was saying that they're only increasing excise to 25%, and then they will drop all the other taxes. Which are the other taxes? The other taxes are import duty, there is VAT and all the rest. But for import duty, we have to have it from an East Africa gazettement. That have to be agreed by the East Africa community. So for now, even the minister himself cannot guarantee that they are going to remove the import duty on mobile phones. And that is not anywhere in the bill. So for now, those are perhaps theories, and we wait to see. But the fact of the matter is that the cost of then mobile phones will then increase. There's a good question you asked about the leases and why you are going to pay, you are going to be around the 10 million. And I just wanted to add a comment there. It's really not an additional tax, or it's not a new tax. The thin capitalization have been there, that you can only be allowed the interest expense up to a tune of 30%. What they are doing is just an amendment where it had leases and it had two conditionals for you to to achieve. And what they did is just to remove that add, so that they just put all. So it's not an additional taxes per se. It's just a clarification, that the finance bill is doing. But for us, to make sure that we continue to support the SMEs, as you have mentioned, the option is we perhaps enhance compliance, make sure that everybody is paying their share of taxes. If, for example, in Kenya, we are perhaps, we have more than 18 million people who can pay taxes, who has some form of revenue. But out of that, maybe only about 6 million people pay taxes. So if only 6 million people pay taxes and we then end up achieving 2.7 trillion, what about if we increase these 6 million people to about even 10 million people? Perhaps then we don't need to increase the taxes. We will then be able to correct the 2.7 with the additional people paying taxes. So sometimes there's a bit of catch-22, I would say. But what the government is doing, one, the people given responsibility to ensure that everybody pays taxes, there are loopholes there. And if those loopholes then can be sealed, then we should not be able to struggle with this. And the other thing that we need to think about is, from what Dr. Gashie said, we must make sure that the economy grow. If we want the manufacturer of mobile phones to be able to sell more phones, and therefore they are able to get higher income and therefore employ more people, we must make sure that those taxes do not cripple their businesses, so that those funds are achievable. So, for example, if we reduce this excise duty from 10, say even to 2%, it means those funds become affordable. What does that mean? Many people will afford. What does that mean to the company that is selling those funds? It means their sales increases. And what that means is that it has a multiple effect on the economy. More people are employed. And that is what we need to, and if that company make more sales, remember they will pay taxes at 30%. It means the tax that they pay to the government also increases.
But that's my problem. But that's my problem, that when we are saying these things, and when we look at the number, because I've been able to read through this over the last couple of days, when we look at the numbers, it doesn't seem as though there is an appetite for these things to happen.
Correct.
Because if there was, the finance bill would mirror that desire. But it doesn't seem as though that's the target. And my question is, who is lurking in the shadows to to almost ensure that this situation you talk about is not clear and present. Because if it were, it would seem to me as though, again, the people that you have crunching the numbers would only point to a solution whereby the economy is actually growing significantly, and that can be realized. It may be growing at a macro level, but it's not growing at a micro level. That people cannot feel the progression of the economy in their pockets. That these MSMEs that we depend on for an economy to grow are feeling throttled by the taxes. And they're not seeing a situation whereby even this VAT that you're asking them to declare, they are saying on what? Because what is it that we've actually then been able to make? So my question is, who is lurking in the shadows saying, tax your people to within an inch of their lives? Whether they grow or not is not our problem here, because it seems like a no-brainer to me that you want to have more money flowing in the economy. You want the purchasing power of your populace to grow or increase. But the opposite seems to be happening, Dr. Gashie. Why would you know the solution, but then do everything except the solution?
Let me visit a minute or two into fool's paradise.
Okay.
Two things: the budget and the infrastructure fund. Then, why I'm saying I visit the fool's paradise, why then, if you are targeted to have 5 trillion on infrastructure board fund, and at the same time we have a budget that includes the same amount of money for development? You know?
I don't think Ochanda heard what you said.
Oh, no, I heard.
You know why I'm in fool's paradise? You know? Yeah. Why? You know, we these things should work in tandem. If the government proposes to have a 5 trillion infrastructure fund, why then would you want to load the budget with 1 trillion borrowed for development? Development is largely infrastructure. Why don't we just, if we believe in it, why don't we just knock off the 1 trillion and we deal with recurrent expenditure, and then the 1 trillion we give relief to businesses so that we can tinker our economy, because anyway we already have the infrastructure fund more and in excess of the budget. Not unless we want to mirror the budget to lay cream and ground the importance on infrastructure fund, and we have to show that our economy is almost growing to that level. I come to the question. You know, we are net borrowers, and actually the budget this year, 2026, 2027, interest borrow almost 1 trillion. Where do you get this money? Some domestic, other from external. But there's a big brother, IMF.
There, I was waiting for that name to. Maybe that's the guy who's lurking in the shadows.
Always talked to the government that it has to show some revenue raising measures that will make sure that it's able to be sustainable to debt ratio. So the World Bank has been on the government case that you must do ABCD. For those of us who are young into it, 1990s, but we are able to conceptualize, there is what we call the structural adjustment programs that change how our economy looks like. The university education, the hospital, everything else that there was to be a component of a Kenyan for that service. And basically, that is what the World Bank all over the world, especially in development economies. For where we come from, in French, we say those who don't have their own, they cannot be have. They don't have. They lack the shame to say no, and that's the case with our country. We don't have. So when World Bank comes and say you must do these ABC,
we're shameless.
We are shameless. We go and do that, disregarding what the common mwananchi or the economy is speaking to you. Lastly, how we make our budget, it's wrong. You'll be surprised today on the projection, because I've been in that process. We already have an estimate of the budget year 2029, 2030, right? It's done in 5 years cycle. And how they do, people in Treasury, my friends there, is that they look at the growth of the GDP, the components, right? So this time we are saying we are going to grow by 5.1%. Then we might project by 2030 we may grow by 6%. So meaning that also our budget grows in tandem, which is not always true. So I think that is where we go wrong, where we budget and we don't do zero budgeting, because we'll look and say, okay, we did a budget last year for I think 4.2, but I think it's even more because we had supplementary for about 320. So actually it's almost 4.5, right, or something like that. So we need to know why we able to achieve. The revenue, we are able to correct about 2.7 trillion something. What is that is leading? What is, if you look at True North, is it true it is possible to correct 2.9? No. Or 3.6, including appropriation in aid and development partners. It's not true. So we should cut our clothes to the size.
Maybe, Daktari, all these, but from your formative statements, is that if you are the CS Treasury, you will forego maybe the finance bill this year.
Yes, I would.
You went ahead and said that we have a potential of 18 million persons, maybe different revenues, salaried, 18 million, but only a third are paying taxes. From where you sit as experts, is it deliberate that the other remaining 2/3 are not paying taxes? But from the finance bill aspect, of course the government, the Treasury has actually been saying that the yearly finance bill is actually to ensure that those who came midway, who were employed, those who came up with businesses should be brought into the net so that they can actually pay taxes. So what happens if we forego a finance bill, and what should be done so that the remaining 2/3 should pay taxes so that we can forego the other debts that actually now strangling the country?
Let me clear before, sorry, it goes. When I say forego, is to say you don't need a financial bill. You can just do amendments to the existing. That's what I meant. You still...
The previous years.
Yeah, because it's in perpetuity. You see, when the CS says, I did not increase taxes, it's a lie. Because the Finance Act 2025, 2023 is in force. So what you need to is just to change amendments there. And we keep loading. Yep.
For me, I think is really a structural problem in the sense that the National Treasury will always go for the easy to tax people. And that's why they are thinking, if, for example, we increase the excess duty on mobile phones for the manufacturers, it becomes very easy because the manufacturers are known where they operate. If, for example, we don't then reduce the pay, the people employed will always pay taxes. And therefore, we will continue to get a 35 billion, as they were saying. So they then go for the easy to tax. There are, of course, these 2/3, which is hard to tax. But that is where technology comes in, to be able to know that there are people doing businesses all over the country and they are not paying taxes. And I was happy when they introduced the A-team, because the A-team meant that so long as I'm trading with my suppliers, then me, I'm known as a taxpayer by the Revenue Authority. My suppliers will also be known as taxpayers. And therefore, if they are not paying their own taxes, the Revenue Authority will be able to go for them. It is a structural problem in the sense that if you were to go for those people through the technology platform that the Revenue Authority have enhanced, then we should be able to bring all the additional people who are not paying taxes. And therefore, to Dr. Gashie's point, we do not need to have finance bill every other year. Because essentially, if, as I said, if we only having 6 million taxpayers paying taxes, if we increase this one even to 12 million, then it means we should be able to collect perhaps that 3.6 trillion easy, because the 6 million are able to collect the 2.7 trillion. So it's really a structural problem. And I think for me, it is just for us...
Which is by design.
Which is almost by design, because we have invested heavily. The Revenue Authority have invested heavily in the structural, in the technology, but perhaps in terms of ensuring that they work the way they should is what is lacking.
What is likely to happen if we're talking about a finance bill that's mostly bent on a reform agenda what are we likely to see then in the next couple of days, weeks, in the run-up to the 1st of July? Start with you, Dr. Gashi.
We're looking at expansion on reforms. Significantly, we did mention is that now you'll file your income returns
by 30th April.
30th April.
Yeah.
And for those who are filing in zero, 31st January, which gives Kina James a headache by the time they do the returns and the reconciliation. And also there is a component of cost in it. When you look at 7.5% to 10% on Lento, I'm looking from the compliance. When it becomes very expensive for an investor, especially, we might have a lot of people not giving proper records. So when you talk about reforms, reforms are supposed to enhance tax correction and compliance. And that's what my brother was saying. If you look at our economy is 80% informal. 80%. And we say 80% of employment is in the informal sector. For me, with the government, and like Moi Kibaki's government, is when people don't have the motivation and the trust and believe that their money, which they pay through tax, is going to the right expenditure. So people may not be motivated to pay taxes because they think, anyway, we pay your money and you take it home. So what is the use? So I would rather keep my money.
Yeah.
So probably the government need to work on that aspect of trust. And it might take another 10 years or a new regime for people to trust that if I pay 10 shillings when I buy my Mutuba, and it's very simple as what James is saying. It's just technology. Tell me when I buy Mutuba in Gikomba at 300 shillings, I'll pay 10 more. For whatever tax you call it.
Yeah.
If you do that correctively, even when I buy meat at my local butcher, for the 200 people buy 300, that 5 shillings go to building your road is insignificant, but more significant when aggregated.
Okay.
I think that is the conversation that the reforms and compliance issues need to be looking at.
What stops, because one would imagine that the CS Treasury in this case, what would stop the CS looking at all of these things and assuming that they are in a position whereby they can guide policy or where they're in the position where they should guide policy? What stops the CS, whether you want to look at the marriage between political and policy, from saying, actually, you know what, this bill, this budget doesn't grow the economy. It is not fostering of a progressive economy. What stops the CS from saying, okay, you know what, guys, this is great, thank you for doing all this work, but let's tailor it in this direction? What would stop him or her, when that would happen, from doing something like that?
If that was to happen, if the ministers that we have are not politicians, if we had a professional learning some of these things, that would happen. However, so long as this office continue to be run by politicians, that can never happen, because every person is looking at it from a short-term perspective. That I need money now to be able to do 1, 2, 3 roads, so that I'm able to tell people that we have done 1, 2, 3. For a professional, say, we better not manage to do 1, 2, 3 in 2 years, but on the 3rd year, the economy will have grown and we'll be able to get this money, and therefore we'll be able. So without this, even as we do these structural reforms that perhaps are majorly in this finance bill, the fact that the economy is not growing, we will continue to struggle to collect this revenue. Even the 120 billion that they intend to collect through this finance bill cannot come through, because they have, of course, done computation and they have seen if Kenya we sells 4 million phones, and therefore we are doing the excess duty at 25%. This is the money we'll collect. That is how the 120 billion have been arrived at. But you are forgetting, for people to buy that number of phones, they must have money. So if they don't have money, that number will not be achieved, and therefore the 120 billion will not be able to achieve. So the structural reforms are good, but we must first of all look at the economy growing, especially from a micro perspective. We should really leave now the macro element, where we are seeing the economy is growing now 4.2, 4.7, pretty good. But from a micro perspective, we are struggling. And if that micro is not addressed, this revenue will not be corrected. We will continue to have these numbers in papers, but we will not achieve it.
In essence, you're saying that the political balancing aspect outweighs the policy part of it, because of course the way Dr. said is actually now we're heading to the political season. It has more ramifications, because until recently, Kenyans never knew that there's an annual finance bill until 2024 that actually brought all those problems. In essence, you're saying the political aspect balancing outweighs the policy aspect.
And I fully agree with you. It is very difficult for especially the president to do it in their first term. It is very difficult because there's some things that you want to pass over. There's some things that you want people to see it in a certain way. But if we then move away from politics and say that let us put politics aside, let us focus on the economy growing, we will then have the right structural reforms, and we'll be able to collect these taxes. So that is what, for us, we continue to push, especially to the National Treasury, the Parliament, that we need, first of all, to focus on the economy. If we focus on the economy, even these taxes will be collected with a lot of ease. Because so long as the company have grown, they will employ more people. Right. And therefore, the pay we are talking about, 35 billion, can even double. But if we continue to actually push on the small amount of money that people have and they continue to pay taxes, then we'll continue to struggle in terms of collecting additional taxes.
So we're saying this finance bill, and if we look at the budget, where the first, or the one that gobbles up a lot of the money, is debt. The second is recurrent expenditure, and then the third, where you have it, is development across sectors. Are we saying that then this finance bill is not economy facing?
No,
it's not.
No, that's now. Thank you, because we should have all finance bill economy facing. It's not about, we go wrong when we think that the finance bill is about taxation. No, it's about the economy. And we normally say the economy is stupid. Simple. It's about, because when you grow the economy, you get the money. It is simple as that. And that is how, and that's why I start with what I call the theory of change. You must tell us what is that you want to change and how. And until as when the Treasury, we need to have someone who believes in disruptive innovation, because that is what we need. And we keep saying when we are teaching at the university, dinosaurs die when they're standing. Why I say this? Because they think they are too big, right, to change. And some of our dinosaurs are Kenya Post and Telecommunication. They are still standing, aren't they?
Indeed.
And you should know that one of the biggest telecom in Kenya came out of an innovation and disruption. So not unless we disrupt and innovate at the Treasury, our finance bill will be facing tax lazy measures and taxation regime, and looking at the economy.
All right. These are the conversations that we're having about the finance bill. And so I just thought about something that perhaps folks should not be complaining about the taxes or whatever is being levied, that you should be complaining about the fact that this finance bill, or the budget generally, is not economy facing. And if you're going to pull Kenya out of the doldrums, you need tax, or you need a finance regime that is going to fix the economy. All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Stephen Gashie, economist, for being here with us this morning. James Kimani is the Associate Director, Tax and Regulatory Services, KPMG East Africa. Asante sana. This will all unfold. We'll see how it does. But thank you for leading this conversation this morning.
Thank you.
Asante sana. Good morning.
This is The Situation Room, the only way to start your day.